All right, so I just hit recording, and this is Karen Moon, and I see that I have the wrong name on my screen, but I'm in the wrong account. That's okay. So I'm creatrix of the Divine Feminine app, and Allison, Mitch, a good friend of mine who's local as well in Naperville, Illinois. We've been talking forever about trying to do a discussion on shamanism. And Allison, it just hasn't gotten put together. If I were more organized with this, I would have a nice, neat little paragraph saying what your background is, but I'm going to hand it to you to kind of give a little background.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Karen. So I'm a holistic healthcare practitioner. I am a registered yoga teacher at the 500 level, or 500-hour level, excuse me. A physical therapist with my doctorate in physical therapy, Reiki master, and then a shamanic practitioner. And I just finished my training with Donna out of Chicago. That was about a 18 to 20 month course. So I just finished that in February, a couple weeks ago.
And I've been going to Allison's circles. She does some work with the Resiliency Institute in Naperville. They have an edible garden. I highly recommend both Allison and the garden. I'm always blown away by your knowledge, and you're so good. We've been hosting circles together at the Healing Arts Metaphysical Center in Batavia, and doing some of them. And usually you just bring so much, and you're so good at it, and you're very good at all the little details that I'm not usually so good at.
Let's see. And your circles are lovely too, Karen. So, and I love working together, and thanks so much for the plug for circles. So the Resiliency Institute is a great resource for those that are local or local-ish in Naperville. They offer courses in herbalism, which I finished, as well as edible wild plants, and I took that as well, and then a permaculture series, and all of those are certificate classes. So I highly recommend those. And then they have the wild edible garden that's organic, and Whole Foods helps sponsor that, and we utilize that for circles as well as those class offerings that they have there.
Awesome. So before we hit record, Allison had asked me how I'm doing this morning, and I'm doing really well. I've got a ton of challenging things going on in my life, but yesterday I went to see Rodrigo, who's at the Batavia Healing Arts Center, and he's a shaman. And not to go into the details, but I left and I was a mess. A couple things had happened, and I thought I was doing good, and then I was a mess, and I got there, and when I left, since I left, I have been feeling incredible. So I don't want to jinx it because I'm sure it's going to, it always comes and goes, but I know that there's something to all of this. I have the questions for you, but I wanted to tell you like this short little story. It's kind of funny, actually. So did I tell you this before, Allison, about how my youngest, my 7-year-old, was in my bedroom and she was going through some stuff, and she found this box that I hadn't touched in like 10 years. Did I tell you this story? No. Okay. Mm-hmm. So she finds this box I haven't touched in 10 years, and she's like, Mom, can I go through this? And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And so she opens it, and the only thing in it is this little small plastic bag. And it's got like these, I think it's my father. My dad died like really suddenly in '94, and he was cremated. We were really close, and he was cremated, and my mom kept like his ashes in this cardboard box for like 10 years or something like that. And for some reason, I have it in my mind that, I didn't get a lot from him, but I remember like, for some reason, I may be completely wrong, but I remember that these are like from his cremated ashes, and they're like bone shards. And I mean, they could be, you look at them and they could be, so and I guess the bottom line is it doesn't really matter, because if I think they are and I'm connected to him that way, and he's kind of it doesn't really matter. So anyhow, so my daughter, we're driving around the other day, and she's like asking me these things about heaven. And she just had some questions, some random kind of, what do you think, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, Georgia, I actually kind of think that heaven is more of a feeling, not really a place that you go to, and then she was like, yeah, but what about, people and stuff? And I said, oh, definitely. I think you're connected to souls that are very important to you. And, when you go up to heaven, you will see them again, and they talk about it near death, when they, your ancestors waiting for you and all that stuff. And I said, that's something that, makes solaces me, is I think when I die, I know for sure that I'll see my dad again. And I said, and I started off to say, I carry my dad, and I was going to say in my heart. And then I was like, in my pocket. Carrying him in my pocket. Because I have one of those little, what I believe to be, they may not be, but they're in my pocket. So we had this huge laugh over it, and we giggled for a long time, and they were like, you are so weird, Mom. And I'm like, yeah. I know I am. But that was like this to me, and I can be completely wrong, and you can correct me, but to me, and I haven't done as much studying or as reading, I'm just going on this kind of shamanism is this blending to me of like time and place, and it's like all the things that of my dad that were in the past, that were in the present, that are in the future, there's parts of that everywhere. And this little thing I'm holding is this little part that ties me that way. And then, I don't know, it's just, shamanism is something to me that transcends your mind. And we're so hung up, or we've been so hung up on what you think, and you have to think correctly and all that stuff. But you hold so much in the rest of your body too. And that's why I think I left feeling fantastic yesterday, is because somehow, and I don't know how he does it, maybe you can, explain more, but I think Rodrigo helps me let go of this trauma that I carry in the rest of my body.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that he does. And what I think is really sweet and beautiful about your story is that you've come to these truths without anyone ever instructing you in it, right? You kind of came to this happenstance and kind of piecemeal by your work with Rodrigo and your readings and your women's circles and your spiritual practice of your own. But you came to understand these inherent truths that we carry with us as humans, as part of our humanity and in our spiritual practice. And so shamanism, they estimate, is anywhere from 60 to 100,000 years old, and it's cross-cultural. It occurred all over the world, and it's our shared history. It was our shared history, our religious history, and everything. So even some of the traditions practiced today have shamanic roots, and very obvious to those of us that have studied shamanism. Some great examples are Tibetan Buddhism, and some of the work around the bardo, that liminal space, or that space of the afterlife, for processing and transformation, and Gnostic traditions and Sufism, things like that are all have a very shamanistic feel. And their different cultures practice their shamanic techniques in a way that's unique to them. But there are like some core ideas that are shared across the world, and it's fascinating to me. And so the fact that you kind of came to understand shamanism without ever being instructed in it just speaks to that, right? Like, we discover these truths as humans and as a way to make meaning of our lives, and have a depth of life too.
Yeah, and I want to definitely. You said that list, and I would put circles in the front part of that.
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no. Just because me, I'm sitting here with that being so passionate as a way to just kind of dive deep and figure things out. And it's something that you're listening. I think I've gotten much more comfortable. I know I've gotten much more comfortable just trying to listen. And I obviously it's not all inside me I'm listening. I'm also listening to what people are saying, like you and books and all the other different things. But I've just gotten better at intuition and all of those things. So tell me, what is your practice? I mean, I'm, and we had looked at some questions earlier, and there was, I think brochures, flyers, pictures, if it has research, empirical based evidence. And I kind of read that and I'm like, what?
So let me, I'll pause you for a second. Those questions were from a student, a graduate student who's doing a project on alternative healing techniques and medicinal techniques. So those were her questions that she shared with me that she was hoping to answer after my session or our session together. So.
Yeah, no, and I know you can do empirical, scientific, how many people have been, but to me, it's kind of, that's not the point,
Right, and it dilutes the practice and it takes away some of the experience too. It sterilizes it, right? It has to be standardized, which there's no way to standardize this. It's very fluid and practitioner dependent and client dependent. And I don't know how you scientific, and standardize this experience.
What are some of the different types of shamanic training? And I know you and I kind of talked, and we're probably not going to have time today, but we had kind of talked that I'm at this place right now where in the past I would hear the term priestess and it would kind of make my skin ruffle. It would be like, because I grew up Roman Catholic and, women can't be priest. That was what I grew up with. So I had to sit through that and kind of dissect it and say, why not? And now I'm comfortable with the term priestess, and I'm very comfortable. And believe me, I know tons. I've seen tons. I've been involved in ceremonies with tons of these women who hold these incredible ceremonies, and they are priestesses in every sense of the word. So I think I'm kind of at the same point right now with shamanism. I don't understand it. And I think, the other day I was talking to my son about it in the car, and he looked it up, and it was something about, had to have had a near-death experience and dealing in different worlds and, very esoteric. But is that what you think shamanism is, or what is your answer?
So there are a couple parts to that question. The first, and remind me or help me come back to all of them if I forget some of the pieces. But the first part you mentioned was in regards to priestess, and priestess and priest is not, those terms are not necessarily synonymous with shaman or shamanic practitioner. So they tend to have different functions. In societies, sometimes those functions are practiced by the same people and sometimes not. So shamanic practitioners tend to be healers for the community, or medicine people, in a sense that they're dealing with spiritual illness often, or the spiritual presentation of an illness. And that's not necessarily the same function as a priest or a priestess who may be communicating with spirits and performing ceremony, but not necessarily for the intent of healing. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's kind of what I had right, that they're more involved in ceremonies, where shamans more involved in healing, right?
Yeah. So that was the first part I think that you mentioned, and the second part of that question was in regards to what makes a shamanic practitioner. Is there, like, I believe in the past you've asked me too, are you born into it, or do you have that accident that your son was referring to, or the near-death experience? And it can be a variety of different means. So some people, it's a family tradition, and it's kind of, they're trained within the family, and it's a family lineage type thing. It can be in some cultures that the person that had a traumatic experience, whether that was near death or struck by lightning, was a common theme mythically, and in certain cultures, that's how they became a shaman, was from this near death lifting of the veil to the spiritual world and surviving that experience. And then in other traditions, like the Celtic traditions, my family is Scottish and Norwegian. In our tradition, it's like a theme of 7 years. So you have to deal with some kind of illness, trauma, heaviness, or event for 7 years worth of processing and then that's usually what precipitates you becoming a shamanic practitioner. So it's not like a near-death one-time event type struck by lightning experience. It's a prolonged suffering in a sense.
So,
yeah.
but you know, and so many of us can say we've suffered for
Right.
7 years or more. What do you think? How do you how do you claim that term, shaman?
So so thank you for bringing that up. And before we go further too, you had asked about trainings. And so, you might be trained by family. There are trainings throughout the US if it's something that you're interested in. And in Chicago, Rodrigo out of Batavia has some, Donna Callahan. Maybe we can post links for some of these. And I know there are training places out in California, and they vary in terms of, personalities, flavors, and expense. So Rodrigo's and Donna's are more affordable, a couple $1,000s. And then the one out in California that I'm thinking of is like $5,000 to $7,000 plus travel, and you're probably talking closer to $10,000. So it's not cheap by any means, but just across the spectrum of affordability there. And then what was your question? We had talked about
how can you claim it? What do you think in your what do you think? How do you claim the term shaman?
So there are those of us that prefer to use the term shamanic practitioner, and that's out of a nod to the fact that some people feel like the term shaman is culturally appropriated and only to be utilized by certain cultures. And so I call myself shamanic practitioner out of respect to that. There's also another tradition that says that you cannot call yourself a shaman. People from the community have to call you a shaman. Once you've served that function and they call you such, then you can start using that term. And I have been called that by some people in the community, but I still refer to myself as shamanic practitioner. And so it's it depends on the practitioner's preference, I guess, and their training, as well as, if they're aware of those cultural appropriation concerns too.
So, and what do you, and I know we had said we only had about 20 minutes here, so we're going to wrap it up soon. What do you think? So you're kind of from a perspective, if you're interested in learning about shamanic practicing, but what if you're interested in going to a shaman? How do you choose? Where do you go? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think that's great. So, and there are a couple different ways to approach shamanic practice, right? You can go into it to heal yourself and receive. You can go into it to learn how to develop these own skills for yourself so you can continue on this path for yourself. And then there are those that may want to use this in the community as an offering to their community. So there are, I guess, different levels that you can do. How to find a practitioner. So, I think for me, I did a lot of searching, and I met with the 3 main shamanic practitioners in the area before I landed on Donna to train with. And I met with Rodrigo. He's lovely. I met with Lauren Torres. She owns Earth Bliss. She's also relatively local to the Chicago area. Her trainings were a little more intensive, like 1 week long intensives, and just around the schedule with small children, that wasn't going to work for me. And so then I ended up working with Donna before I signed up for her shamanic practitioner training. I took several courses with her and really had a great experience with her. So I would, shop around, and I recommend that even with circles. And that's why I always reference your Divine Feminine app, and I'm going to give it a plug right here too. And that there's never one perfect fit, right? And you just have to, if something doesn't feel right, trust that and try again. So same with circles. If you attend a circle and it just wasn't your thing, don't write off circles completely. Try a different one, a different facilitator, or a different location. Same with same with shamanic practitioners. So, try a few and know that if it felt off, trust that experience and try someone else. Don't write off the whole practice. I would at least give something 2 or 3 tries before you're like, oh, it's not for me, and just give it up entirely. So, but that's just my bias.
Yeah, I know that I mean, because I talk to people about, I've been working with Rodrigo now probably about 8 or 10 months or something like that. And so, and I talk a lot about it, but at the same time, they're like, well, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, and it's really kind of hard to describe. Uh, you know, I remember like before I had decided, I felt this like calling to go there, you know, even when Healing Arts Metaphysical, they moved, they were on the other side of the street. And I just felt this, and I just hadn't gotten there yet. And then I decided to give them a call and try out what was shamanic healing. And I had talked to another friend of mine, and I'm like, do you think this is going to work? Or do you think this is just, you know, woo woo? And she's like, well, you know, the biggest things are uh, intention and attention to it, you know, like you something is obviously calling you to try this out, and you know, your intention is there, and and I don't know, I'm not explaining this well. Again, help me out here, Allison.
No, and I understand what you're saying. So essentially, you know, if it makes things meaningful to you and it feels good afterward and you feel better, trust that. Like that to me, so I come from a very Western medical model situation with my healthcare training and background with a physical therapy degree, and very heavy scientific and anatomical and logical and reductionistic, right? And the body is looked at through a certain lens, and that's great, and that has its purpose and intent, and it helps a lot of people. But there is a whole realm outside of that of healing, of a different way of looking at the body. And just because there isn't a scientific explanation for it doesn't mean it's not trustable. Like it was your experience, you perceived it, and it made you feel better. To me, that's enough.
Yep.
You know, like,
yes. Hey, women.
is it placebo, or is it, you know, where
Does it
Rodrigo,
matter? You know, at the end of the day, does it matter?
no,
I mean,
it
right.
absolutely doesn't. You got better, and that's enough. Like,
yes, and that's exactly. I mean, I went to him with specific, you know, I had, you know, addiction problems, and I was like, it's enough. I'm done with this in my life. And the funniest thing is, we really didn't even talk about those except at the beginning one, and I stopped him. You know, it was a process of, and I believe it's tied together. You know, can I go, and I guess maybe that's why I laugh at that empirical. Can I go prove that it's tied to it, or that it's something specific he did, that, or if you go do the same thing, it's going to have the same outcome? No, you know, but I'm sitting here telling you, yes, it did it for me.
right. And was it where you were in your journey at that time? Like, were you more receptive to whatever healing technique, whether that was mental, physical, or spiritual, or all of those, or none of those, you know? So it's also probably where you were at that time, and your ability and willingness to receive it. Like you were saying, the intention and attention, and just ready to heal that part of you. So somebody that's resistant to shamanism and doesn't trust in shamanic practice, would they benefit from it or heal? Probably not to the same extent, you know? So, um,
All right, so let's wrap it up. Maybe we'll do another one of these. I think it was really good, and I've enjoyed talking to you again. So my app is thedivinefeminine.app.com, and it has been around since 2016, adding women's circles, sacred circles, men too, and events. And you can find things like who you mentioned on the app, and you can also find yours, where if they're interested in learning more about what you do, where should they go?
check out my website, please, or my social media feeds. So wildwomaninthesuburbs.com. You can also email me, wildwomaninthesuburbs@gmail.com.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Allison. And yeah.